Thank you all for joining us this Sunday for the talk. Let me introduce our speaker of the day. His name is Siddharth Edke. He has a master's in biodiversity. In fact, he's my senior from the same course. He's currently working as a fellow and area convener of the Center for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services at the Energy and Resources Institution, New Delhi. For the past 6 years, he has extensively worked in Nagaland uh, on the basis of biodiversity and forests across the eastern Himalayan belt. Today, he is going to share his experience about working in Nagaland and how community conservation played an important role for conserving forests there. Thank you, Siddharth, for joining us. I would hand over the platform to you.
Thank you so much, Sushil. First of all, thank you to Journeys for inviting me over. It's great to share our experience of working from Nagaland with all our participants who've joined today. So I will just upload my presentation. But let's do one thing. Before I start with my presentation, there's a small video on what are community conserved areas and what is their relevance. It's a short video of about 3 minutes. So I would like to play that first, and then we'll go ahead with the presentation, and I'll talk more about our work in Nagaland. So just a second, play it.
Miss it. This hum that is healing the injured earth. These are among the richest forests on the planet. But this abundance is hard-earned. A few decades ago, these forests in northeast India were overexploited. Their wood sold and wildlife hunted down. Until things reached a breaking point and pushed the local people to turn the tide. They voluntarily declared large tracts of community and private areas as protected forests.
This is Saint Daniel Villages Conservation Area. We have totally banned hunting, fishing, all agricultural activities, and even collection of vegetables and other forest produces are totally banned. And anybody caught roaming around in this reserve without our knowledge are penalized.
The collective decisions of the community are sacrosanct. Thanks to this wisdom, today Nagaland has nearly 500 community conserved areas that are flourishing without any formal support of the government.
This Sukhai CCA area is very rich in biodiversity. In this small CCA area, around 450 hectares, we have collected more than 120 species. We have collected like medicinal plants, animal fodders, some trees bear fruit, as well as some for vegetable purpose.
इसका नाम है मिचिस, इसका नाम है अपिकुस, इस पेड़ का नाम है लाखाइपेस.
This biodiversity has returned over 15 long years. However, it can be lost within.
Okay. I hope you can see the presentation now.
Yes.
Sushi?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So So this was just an introductory video for all of you, just to give you a feel about what we are going to talk today. I'm sure all of you must have guessed that today's presentation is about biodiversity. Today's presentation is about communities, and today's presentation is about conservation. So the title is very simple: Community Conservation in Nagaland. So I'm going to talk more about that. But before I begin, I work for the organization called TERI. It's the Energy and Resources Institute. It's one of the largest organizations working in the field of sustainability since last 4 decades, and I've been associated with this organization since last 9 years. I'm based out of New Delhi and working for this organization since last 9 years. So continuing, I've worked in this exciting place, exciting state called as Nagaland. I'm sure all of you know that it's in the northeast part of India. It's a small state of about 16,500 square kilometers, which is just 0.5% of India's landmass. But Delhi itself, so it's almost slightly bigger than Delhi. You can say that Delhi is about 1,400 square kilometers. It's all tribal. There are 16 major tribes in Nagaland and several other sub-tribes. So hence, there are distinctive dialects and there are cultural features. So everything is very, very diverse when you talk about Nagaland. Again, if you have to talk about population, it's on a much lower side. If you take the population of our country, it was recorded only 19.8 lakhs in 2011. So the population of Delhi itself right now is about 1.9 crores. So that's quite minuscule if you compare other areas in our country. Almost 71% population lives in rural areas, and 63% of the total households they are engaged in farming. So that's a bit about the demography of Nagaland. From biodiversity point of view, again, it's a very, very exciting place. It falls in the Indo-Burma and Eastern Himalaya biodiversity hotspots, so that makes it very special. You get to see some very interesting flora and fauna in the state of Nagaland. I mean, the whole of Northeast itself, it has almost 25% of India's forest cover at this time. So you can imagine, it's a very, very green area. And second highest number of bird species in the world have been recorded from the northeast part of India. And almost so new species are being discovered from this area as more and more scientists and researchers are slowly exploring these untouched areas and getting to know more about the local biodiversity. So from biodiversity, let's go to the forest resource of the state. Almost 80% of the total geographical area of Nagaland is covered by forest. It's a lush green place, and almost 36.6% are dense forest. So that's why you see a very, very high percentage of biodiversity in this area. But what is exciting that you don't find in other parts of India is that almost 88.3% of the natural habitats in Nagaland, and I'm talking about forests, are owned by the communities there, by individuals, by various clans, village, and district councils. So this is a very, very interesting and unique feature that you see in Nagaland, where the community is in ownership of the natural resource or the forest in the state. So naturally, I mean, the community takes all the decisions when it comes to when you have to talk about conservation. So that's what is exciting as well as challenging when you work in Nagaland. So it falls under Article 371A of our Indian Constitution, where all the rights have been given to the local communities. So actually, the local communities or the villages, they act as republics, and they govern their own resources. They decide what they want to do with their forests, with their rivers, with all the natural resource that is present there. The village itself maintains law and order, and they are responsible for delivering justice as well. So it's a very, very, very exciting place. It's a very different place compared to working in other parts of India, because you actually have to work with the communities. You actually have to convince them. You have to talk to them about conservation. You have to talk to them about biodiversity, and you have to work with them if you want to conserve the forests there. Uh, so again, when you're in Nagaland, this is a common feature that you see there, which is a photograph that you see on your screen. Uh, there's a multiple usage of landscape. In this picture, you can see that there's forest on the top of the hillside. So majorly, you will see that the top side of the hills are not cut. The forests are intact there because naturally they are the source of water for the local communities. So they are not cut down, and they're preserved in most of the cases. So here in this picture, you can see that the forest is intact on the top side of this hill. Then you can see some shifting cultivation in between where maize is being grown, and on the lower side you can see some terrace farming where rice is being grown, which is then again close to a rivulet which is flowing from there. So this is an interesting land use that you can find in Nagaland. It's very interesting from the point of view of biodiversity as well. How biodiversity flourishes not just in the forest area, but also in the agriculture, the shifting cultivation area, as well as the terrace cultivation area. The food culture in Nagaland is also very unique. We've spent a lot of time there, as Sushi said, since 2014. I've been working in that area. So our palate has sort of gotten used to the different taste that is there. Uh, the boiled food or the boiled meat that they eat. I mean, slowly you develop a taste for that. There are a lot of pictures that you can see in front of you. So lots of green vegetables that are grown in the home gardens itself. Almost every household has a home garden in the backyard where all these green vegetables are grown, 100% organic. Uh, but again, I mean, there's a lot of local hunting as well. So you can see lots of pictures there in front of you, where hunting is very popular amongst the communities. And though there is Wildlife Protection Act there, it's actually not followed that much. The local communities are not aware of that. And as I said, because the local communities are in charge of their own biodiversity, their own forest, many a times because of the traditional this thing, they still follow hunting even till today. Uh, so this is again very exciting. The community part of it. The first moving image that you see is of community fishing, where the entire village just gets into a river on one particular day, and they beat this particular creeper on a log in the river. And because of the systematic way of beating, and because of the vibrations, whatever is there in the river is stunned, and then that is collected and consumed by the local communities. Second moving image is of community farming, where again the community comes together and helps each other when they practice cultivation. And the last image is of community hunting that you see, where again an entire village just sets out for days together, and then they hunt whatever is there in their particular forest area, which belongs to them. So these are the three interesting images in front of you. So what are the threats and challenges in Nagaland as of now? The first one is pretty common to all the other parts of our country as well, which is the population increase. The population has been increasing in Nagaland as well, but then compared to other parts of India is not that much. It's mostly concentrated in Kohima and Dimapur, which are the major towns of the state. Out of the total geographical area, almost half is cleared each year for shifting cultivation. So as I said, farming is the main occupation there, and they largely follow shifting cultivation because a lot of land is still available to follow this traditional practice. A huge amount of land is cleared each year for shifting cultivation. So that creates a problem for the local biodiversity, for local wildlife. And as I was mentioning, because of the traditional ways of eating, there is extensive hunting and very aggressive fishing that has led to depletion of local wildlife there. You can see some pictures in front of you. Uh, so now, how did we get associated uh, with with this beautiful state, with the people there? Uh, so so since 2014, I've been visiting this area, and the Forest Department of Nagaland, in fact, invited Terry in 2014 because they wanted to know that how many actual community conserved areas exist in the state. So this is a very traditional form of conservation where uh, almost each village has some reserve forest where they ban hunting or tree logging, what you also saw in the short documentary. Uh, and this is just for the protection of the local resources so that they do not absolutely deplete everything that is there. So it's sort of a reserve that each village keeps where they do not cut forests, where they do not kill animals. And we did an extensive survey in the year 2014. So, and what we observed was out of 1428 villages that were there, almost 407 of them had active CCS. So, when I say active CCS, I mean that every village had a resolution that they will, written resolution, where they said that they will not hunt in a particular year or in a particular month. They will not allow people to cut logs there. And there were various rules that were laid down. So there were almost 407 such CCAs in the state of Nagaland. And what we also observed further was 84% of these total CCAs had primary forests, for forests that were never cut down for logging, that were never used for anything, that were absolutely untouched. People were not venturing in these forests. So that was great for the biodiversity purpose. Again, through extensive surveys, what we found that why people are keeping such reserves or these community conserved areas is that they understand the concept of forest degradation. So almost 74% people reported that they have these reserve forests or CCA, so they want to arrest forest degradation. And almost 65% also reported that this is to also curb the loss of key wildlife species. They knew that the hunting was extensive, and that's why mm, so that they do not deplete all the local wildlife. They have these small pockets or these reserves where no hunting is allowed, and then that area is used as a ground for population to breed. But then once they come out in their agricultural fields, people are allowed to hunt and shoot them. So that was again very interesting. Then another interesting part, what we saw was almost 84% of them were self-initiated. The forest department there also was responsible for initiating few of them, but that percentage was very low. But then uh, that was great that these CCAs existed, and Terry was the first one to document these CCAs all throughout the state of Nagaland. But then there were some challenges also that we saw with these CCAs. That uh, these CCAs had very informal understanding. Not all CCAs had written resolution or they were not organized. Uh, uh, Many CCAs had seasonal bans. So only in say during monsoon season, which is generally a breeding season, they will not allow people to hunt birds or they will not allow people to hunt other wildlife. But all throughout the year, there was no such ban. Then another problem was each of the CCA, the average size was just 500 hectares. So when we talk about conservation per se, or large contiguous forests for the wild populations to migrate from one place to another, this area was very small. You can see a small picture on your left side where the right side is lush green, and that's a CCA area. Then there's a river flowing in between. But on the left hand side, this village has completely cut down the forest that they have as a part of shifting cultivation. So that's why for the movement of wildlife, this wasn't an ideal area because there were certain patches which were good for the breeding population, but when they moved out, then there was no forest cover, or they were either being hunted or killed. Then 81% of these CCAs were struggling with alternative livelihoods. Say today they do not log because there is no major industry in Nagaland. There are not many jobs being created in Nagaland. So if logging does not happen, then how do they still make living for themselves? So that was again another challenge. How do we find alternative livelihoods for them? Also, these CCAs are not formally recognized by the Indian government. There is no recognition like in other parts of India. You have these protected areas in form of national parks and sanctuaries where tourists go, where a lot of money goes from the Indian government. But these community conserved areas are actually not formally recognized by the government of India, and hence they do not receive any funding or any support as such, to continue this good noble work. It's completely, because of their own initiative and because of the traditional ways of that they've been following. Again, another problem is also that say one village has a as a CCA area, and they're dedicatedly conserving that area. But then there were problems of other nearby villages or villagers getting into their area and poaching the animals there, or the timber mafia actually going and cutting down trees there. So these were all the challenges that we saw while we were documenting uh, the number of CCAs all across Nagaland. Then the ownership pattern was also interesting. When you say these CCAs are community owned areas, what we found was almost 56% of them actually belong to individuals, not to the community as a whole, but to individuals. 72% of them belong to clans, and only 31% of them belong to the village council. So actually, a lot of individual villagers have donated their land to the village council or for the sake of conservation. So, so this is how the ownership pattern was when we were studying these CCA areas. So then we thought, okay, all these challenges exist. These areas exist. There are about 407 CCAs. That's great, fine. But then, what is the next step? Uh, the major lacuna, like I said, was each of the CCA was a very small area, and then if we want contiguous movement of wildlife, or we want local biodiversity to flourish, we need a much larger area for this. So keeping that in mind, we thought of writing and implementing a project in 2016, where we thought, let's try out this pilot, where we got these three villages called Sukhai, Gaki, and Kevika. This is in Zuneboto district of Nagaland. It's right in the center of heart of Nagaland, this Zuneboto district, where we randomly went to these three villages. And while, I mean, this happened while we were documenting all these species, but actually these three villages approached us, and they said that for a long time they've been wanting to conserve their forest area and their the river as well, because the number of fishes were depleting rapidly from the river that flows next to this area, but they didn't know how to go about it. So then we decided this can be our pilot area, and because you can see in the picture that it's a lush green area. These villages have been three villages have been conserving this area for a long time. There's a beautiful river that passes from there. So then we decided that this can be our pilot area, and uh, what we decided the objective should be is that first we'll try to mobilize these three villages to come together, and we'll sort of link them so that we'll have a much larger area, a joint CCA, you can say, so that these three individual CCAs come together and we have a much larger area in form of a joint CCA. Then we also thought that okay, we've been practicing these hunting bans and all, but we'll sort of slowly move from seasonal bans towards a permanent ban. Then we also thought we'll do a biodiversity documentation, extensive biodiversity documentation of these areas. And by biodiversity documentation, I do not mean just the flora and fauna, but also their indigenous knowledge, their culture, because uh, these all these things are not documented in Nagaland. It's an oral culture, so it's being passed from generation to generation. But as this new generation is slowly moving away towards cities and towards larger cities, you can see that this traditional knowledge is getting lost somewhere. So then we thought that we'll actually document all this traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge. Then we also thought that since most of these CCAs are struggling from the problem of alternative livelihood, we will try some ecotourism initiatives there. Some very low footfall ecotourism. I'll talk more about that later. And then we also thought that since these CCAs are not recognized by the government of India, let's try and promote a policy where the state actually recognizes them, and so does the government of India. So these were the main objectives that were set uh, in 2016 while we were trying out uh, this different work. The first step was, of course, activity planning. First, getting to know the people there, getting to know the problems there. You can see from the pictures in front of you, it's a very vibrant society. It's a very colorful society. It's a very welcoming society. Unfortunately, people outside only know about the insurgency that exists in Nagaland and few other northeastern states. But I must tell you, the people there are very welcoming. They're very nice, and it's great fun to work with them. So you can see some pictures of the terrace farming that they have, some local baskets, handicrafts that they make, a particular village that you can see, and the local shawls and the local jewelry that is there. Of course, we started with extensive community mobilization where we had to hold many meetings with these three villages. Even though they were forthcoming and they said that they wanted to do conservation, the concept of conservation itself was new for them. They didn't know what conservation means, what they actually have to do, what we have to do, what the government has to do. There were a lot of questions in the beginning. They thought that since they own their forest, if they start a community reserve and people start coming there and the government recognizes them, then will the government eventually take away their land? There were lots of questions in the beginning, and we were very patient to answer all of them. Of course, we had a lot of support from our green champions, a selected few people who were highly motivated, who really helped us and who really had this dialogue with the villagers of these three villages. So a lot of time, actually maximum time went on mobilization of this community on what we want to do and why we want to do it. Then there was a formal declaration where these three villages came together. They formed a committee between themselves where they had elected members who decided that they will form a committee. So this TVBCLN was formed, the Tizu Valley. So this valley is called Tizu Valley, and the river that I was talking about is called Tizu River. So hence Tizu Valley Biodiversity Conservation and Livelihood Network was formed. And they also had a beautiful CCA logo that they decided. Uh, so then, so this is how the institution building happened after the mobilization process. Then the next step was linking these three CCAs, which belong to these three different villages, linking them together. So then obviously this happened through a GIS mapping and participatory mapping. We actually gave training to the local youth there on how to make these participatory maps, on how to use a GPS. Because the forests are so dense there, it was not possible for our team to actually uh, go and visit and map all these areas. So a very elaborate training was given on how to handle a GPS to the local youth there, who are experts in getting into these forests, and so they were the ones who mapped their own areas, the forest boundaries and the village boundaries and everything. So this was the next logical step. Then we moved towards understanding what sort of resolutions existed. I initially was talking about that every village has a written resolution where they say that if there is a offender, then uh, punishments, or uh, uh, what sort of fines are imposed on the offenders. So this is all written in form of a resolution. So all the three villages were then encouraged to make this resolution more formal, and it was then circulated widely amongst all the other neighboring villages, the deputy commissioner of Zunimboto. So all this formal process happened. Then actually the imposition of fine process also happened on trespassers. So once the resolution was passed, at least the villagers of these three villages, they were adhering to all the laws and all the rules that were, laid down in these resolutions. But then it so happened that some ill-informed person from other village who was a trespasser came into their reserve area, into their CCA, and tried to hunt a deer or try to catch a fish. So actually, the villagers from these three villages, they started taking rounds, uh, and they actually started imposing fines on these trespassers. So some of the examples are in front of you, where 25,000, 85,000. So these are like big amounts for the villages there. But these kind of fines are actually imposed on the trespassers. Of course, the first time they give some kind of leeway where they let the offender go, but if he or she is a repetitive offender, then these kind of fines are definitely imposed on the trespassers. Then there was a legally there was a formation of this joint CCA. The three villages of Sukhai, Kiviko, and Gaki, they actually came together and they decided to donate almost 939 hectares. So that's close to 10 square kilometer of area as a CCA, a joint community conservation area. So you can see the village-wise area of CCAs on your left side. Sukhai had about 365 hectares of land, Gaki about 370 hectares, and Kiviko roughly around 200 hectares of land. So in the map here, you can see where these CCA areas were. Most of them were next to the river, so a large part of river was also conserved. But what was fine, they did decide to keep this 10 square kilometers of biodiversity rich forest as a CCA. But then they decided that they will completely ban hunting and destructive fishing in the entire area that they own, the entire area that is owned by these three villages. That area was all itself around 3,751 hectares. So that's a huge area uh, uh, in comparison. So what we did was we had to do a lot of conservation education and awareness, because these guys were totally new to the concept of conservation. Almost 30 sensitization campaigns were held during while this project was being implemented. 1,200 individuals from these three villages were directly impacted because they were a part of it. But then almost 10,000 individuals from the nearby villages were indirectly impacted by the kind of activities that we're doing. We also stressed a lot on scientific publications, popular articles, and the villages themselves also took part in a lot of exposure visits to showcase what they're doing. There's a dedicated website also that we have created called nagalandcca.org. You can visit that where you'll find a lot of information on the kind of work. There were a lot of exposure visits. The Gaon Buras, the village heads, the youth, they were all taken to the nearby states to showcase success stories. We showed them success stories from Pake Tiger Reserve, of Hornbill Conservation. We took them to Kaziranga. So all this was completely new for them. They had never stepped out. They had never seen this kind of conservation that is ongoing on a massive scale. So it was all motivating for them to come back and then persuade others to continue the conservation work that we had thought about. Uh, so this was again a very important thing that we did, which was assessing the local biodiversity. But then we also made these documents called as People's Biodiversity Registers, where the local people, the communities themselves, were given training on identifying local birds, butterflies, and lots of other fauna that was visible. And they themselves, came up with local names. Then we showed them pictures, and then we also identified the scientific names as well as the common names. So a lot of information then went into these people's biodiversity registers. A lot of information about their culture and indigenous knowledge as well, as I was mentioning in the previous bit. Uh, you can see here almost 220 species of birds have been now documented from the CCA area. 31 reptiles, 11 amphibians, 200 butterflies, and equal number of moths. And these all have been documented by communities. Initially, we gave extensive training to these local youths on how to, document this local biodiversity. Cameras were given to them, binoculars were given to them under the project, training was given to them, all the field guides were given to them. And it's amazing, how the communities were motivated, because later on, you can see some pictures of camera traps here. All these camera traps were actually bought by the local communities themselves. TERI or no other organization paid for it. Because of their own curiosity, they bought these camera traps. A few of the camera traps were also donated by Sushil. And thanks to that, a lot of local biodiversity has now been documented by the communities themselves. We just were initially involved in it, but now it's all being done by the communities themselves. Then on the left side, you can see a scientific paper. So we involved the communities themselves while we were publishing these papers. So they too are the authors in this, where new species were documented for the first time, or there were a lot of interesting discoveries that were happening as we were documenting this local biodiversity. And as I said, the People's Biodiversity Register is a document that has rich folklore, traditional knowledge, a lot of information about ecology, biodiversity, and cultural practices, which has been done or codified for the first time. All this knowledge has been oral over the years, but now it's been actually documented for them. And I'm happy to say that the communities are so motivated that they themselves have taken almost thousands and thousands of copies, and they've distributed it to other villages, just to make them aware. And the communities do take a lot of pride in this. Just some of the snapshots of the local wildlife that we've spotted there now. The short-nosed wine snake, crested. There's a cirro. Then there's a gliding frog, Rhacophorus species, hornbills, then Blythe's tragopan, which is the state bird of Nagaland. So a lot of interesting biodiversity already exists there, which is now slowly visible. You can see a good change over last 6 years because there's been a complete ban on hunting. So no more gunshots. So now you can see all these animals now in the open in a much better way. Um, so this was a good opportunity for us to promote ecotourism. We called them biodiversity meets, where we took interested people from Delhi, from Bombay, Bangalore, various groups to our field site, and they interacted with the communities. They tried to document the local biodiversity. So mind you, these were already the people who were interested. These were not the general tourists, but these were the people who already had a knack for butterflies, for birds, and who were willing to come there and have this kind of experience. So definitely they had a great time there, interacting with the communities. Our communities had a great time talking to them, because see how many people actually go there, right? So it was a great learning and sharing experience for both the parties. Uh, and Yeah, and coming back to the ecotourism initiative, a WhatsApp group has been formed, a booklet has been developed. There have been many articles. The community has also undergone training in hospitality from Airbnb. They have slowly developed their homestays. And I'll urge all of you, if you're interested, to definitely go and visit this area once. It's completely unexplored, and I'm sure you will fall in love with this place. So the last part was holding a dialogue on policy, because we really wanted the state of Nagaland or the government of India to formally recognize these CCAs, so that some sort of funding, some sort of support is extended towards them. These are some of the articles uh, that came in the local newspapers while we were there. Uh, on your picture, you can see some rare records of new species, some moths that were recorded for the first time, and these were recorded by the communities. We just helped them identify them, but these were actually recorded by the communities. A lot of good posters were developed as a part of awareness campaign. You can see one on moths and one on butterflies on your screen. That were and these pictures were taken by the communities themselves. There were lots of awards and recognition for the good work that they're doing. UNDP has given them an award in 2018 and several other recognitions. Uh, so 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 what the so I'll end my presentation by saying the good thing is that uh, we just sort of initiated this movement, but what is the best part is that the communities, since last 2 years that the project has ended, the community still continues to work and still continues to take forward this conservation movement, and they're super active. They keep holding these different festivals at various platforms. And they're very active. They keep calling experts there. They keep interacting with their neighboring villages, persuading them to be part of this, joint CCA program. So a lot of positive and interesting things have happened, and we just been a small part of it. But I'm glad that we've been there for them since last many years. So that's about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siddharth, for this amazing talk. It was very insightful for people who've never visited Nagaland. Uh, I'm also particularly fond of this project, and at Journeys have been affiliated with this project for multiple reasons. One reason being the style in which this project has been executed. Terry, other organizations, has collaborated and worked with the locals. And once the training part was done, they handed over the right to manage the place to the locals. Usually, we see uh, the trainers take over the project, but here, because the locals were given complete freedom, they are evolving really fast. What I would
Right.
appeal to all of you is Nagaland has always been typecasted in a certain way. But trust me, I have spent almost a month or more at a stretch there. It is completely safe because that's the first thing when we talk about Nagaland, people ask us, "You are not safe. Something will happen to you," but it is completely safe. Also, what I would suggest and request all of you is, these people have given up their traditional way of making money, which is selling timber, selling meat. So, because we have told them, who are into conservation, who are closer to animals, so they have done their part. Now we need to do our share by visiting the place and contributing to the economy so that it is sustainable for them. Because if it is not sustainable, eventually they might go back to their traditional practices. So if you want such projects to do well, we need to contribute enough to such projects and not just pass judgments over them. Uh, this place is amazing. I visited all the three places. It is a go-to place for anyone who is tired of going for a safari. It is not just meant for wildlife enthusiasts, but it is also great for landscape photographers. Within wildlife as well, every strata of wildlife can be explored here, from reptiles and amphibians to butterflies and moths to mammals to birds. And for all you know, you might just come across a new record or a new species, because that's what happened with us when we were on field every time.
Yeah.
It's such a unexplored terrain that you really don't know what you might come across. uh, the best part about working with Terry for me, and Siddharth, Pia, and Yatish has been that they created a very successful model. And now they gave the part to the locals to manage the project, and they've taken this model and they're applying it in other places. And that is what is the key to creating a lot more pockets like these where conservation happens by the locals, and not just glamorizing one region of the country and just selling it. So that is the best part about working with the Terry team. The session is now open for question and answers. In case anybody wants to ask any question to Siddharth, please type your questions in the chat box. Siddharth, in the meanwhile, if you could tell them how can they plan a visit to the CCAs, how does that work? In the meanwhile, people can write their questions in the chat box.
Yeah. First of all, Sushil, thank you so much for those kind words. I mean, I'm glad that you could visit the field site. We uh, really urge anyone and everyone who wants to come and visit the area for whatever reason. We had requests where some writers wanted to come there just for peace and tranquility. They were most welcome. We had requests, I was just telling you, from herpetologists who wanted to come and study the local herpetology there. They are most welcome. Anyone and everyone who, for whatever purpose that might be, wants to come and visit the area is most welcome. Uh, so I earlier mentioned about our green champions. So one of them is Ivan, who's like hugely supported this whole movement, and had people like Ivan been not there, Terry or anyone else would not have been successful in achieving what we have achieved over last few years. So I can definitely share, or Sushil, you can share a number of Ivan,
Sure.
or yeah. So if anyone wants to go plan a visit there, then they can do so. I know right now because of the COVID situation, it's very tough, but maybe once things normalize, I'm sure many of you would like to actually visit the area. Uh, because it is a beautiful area, and uh, it remains so round the year. Like it's cool, it's green. You can visit that area in any season, and it will surprise you for sure.
Right, guys, I repeat, in case anybody has any questions, please feel free to write a question in the chat box. Okay, Ranjit, I have the first question. What is necessary to become CCAs as a conservation movement in a state? So basically, I think if I'm not wrong, he's trying to ask you, Siddharth, about what is the process or criteria for an area to be notified as CCA.
So Yaranjit is a very dear friend of mine, and he has already been working in that area before us. He works for Foundation for Ecological Society, and they too have been working in that area. So uh, I'm sure he knows the process very well. But for the benefit of all other participants, uh, we had in our initial work while we were documenting these CCAs, we had taken these four parameters which were decided by IUCN in an international conference as a definition of international CCAs. So among these four, the most top one were whether this particular village has a written resolution for conserving the area and how active they are. So that's why I said, I mean, initially we had to go through all the 1400 villages to see their commitment and what sort of work they're doing. So we had to travel all across Nagaland and document each and every village. And then we understood that there were about 407 such CCAs who had these active resolutions and who were conserving their areas. In the second part, as I said, why we chose these three particular villages was because they were forthcoming and they wanted to do something. They wanted to conserve their fish fauna as it was depleting. They wanted to do something, but they were clueless on how to go about it. So that's why we decided that we'll work with them. I hope it answers Ranjit's question, or if he has anything
Hi,
specific.
Siddharth. Actually, like you said, Nagaland you have almost like 407 CCS,
Yes.
but you also mentioned the CCA is yet to get recognized by the state government actually.
Yeah.
And in recent past, we have seen though the government of Nagaland has been promoting CCA and talking about the CCA in different platforms, and also getting a lot of funding in the name of CCS actually. But in
Okay.
recent times, we have seen most of the CCS actually are converting into the community or conservation
Con-
reserve actually. When if we talk
Conservation.
about
Yeah.
the Sukhais, recently I heard they're in the process of converting their CCS into conservation reserve. So how
Right.
do you
Right.
see
Right.
the CCA can be become a conservation models in the state
Right.
against the so-called our convention model of conservations?
Correct. So that's a very valid question. I mean, for the benefit of others, let me just tell you that along with national parks and sanctuaries, the government of India also recognizes conservation reserves or community reserves, and these are different from these community conservation areas. Why? Because the basic difference is here the communities are in charge uh, of their own natural resources and they are the decision makers. When we talk about conservation reserves, which the government of Nagaland is very eager to push, so they do want to recognize these CCAs under this particular definition, which is already recognized by the government of India under the PA network that we have. But the problem here is that once they're declared as conservation reserves or community reserves, then there will be some say from the forest department, into what or why, what and how they should, go about with the conservation work. But when we talk about CCAs, and that's why we try to push this CCA policy, unfortunately, it got stuck somewhere in the red tape bureaucracy that we have. But what we were trying to push is that the communities have the complete ownership and they decide what is good for them, and they've been deciding, all these years for time immemorial. Uh, and what can be a better proof that you have 25% of forest cover in Northeast India and not the rest of our country? It's a direct proof that what these communities have been planning, doing traditionally, it has worked somewhere. And they should be given this chance to continue with that work. So that's how I see that, this, had the government of India or the state government of Nagaland recognized these CCAs separately and have pushed for that policy, I really think that could have been a better conservation model.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, also it is very interesting to see. I think the Nagaland has a like highest number of conservation reserve these days as compared to other states
Yes.
actually. And this is one of the worry factor for the CCS in Nagaland also, where the most of the community are getting lured by the forest department. Give it an example, like you heard about the Suru villages recently. This
Yeah.
CCA has been converted into a conservation reserve, and what happened actually? The part of the conservation reserve, the forest department has provided some sort of the funding to the community, and this funding is decided by the forest department or the community. But as part of the conservation
Correct.
reserve management committee, it has to be decided in consultation with community. What the forest department did, they actually provided one a piglet with each household and some small amount of cash actually, and then the community realized it is actually not going in their favor actually, and there is a lot of confusions regarding these also. So that's one of the worry factor. Like we have been also trying to push this through the Nagaland Community Conservation Forum
Yeah.
to forward a resolution to the government of Nagaland, so that this policy like you're talking about should have a separate policy in respect to the what is the forest department of government of Nagaland is trying to push for this time being, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you for.
Yeah, absolutely right here, Ranjit. So that's why, I mean, right from the beginning, you have to push this thought into them, and it has to come from them as well. That it's their movement. Whatever they're doing, it's for their own sake. It's for the future of. It's for their future generation. Which there have been some really good examples. If you talk about Sendinu Village CCA or Faking Wildlife, where people have actually taken the entire ownership of this conservation model upon themselves, and they have ensured that whether they get or they do not get any support from government or any other agency, they're still going to continue with this model. So if you talk about sustainability, I think in the long run, this is what will keep this kind of conservation effort floating. That's what I think. I think there's another question from Divyanshu. Sushil, can I take this question?
Yes, please.
Okay, so he's asking, does every model of CCA successful while implementing, or what can cause the model to fail? No, uh, no. It's a very, very complicated process. I mean, in last 6 years, we've just managed to work with these three villages, and there too we face a lot of problems where every now and then some villager will come forward and say that his land is a part of the larger CCA and why he should not take it back. Or some villager will come to us asking us or having this query whether the government tomorrow will come and take away his land. Uh, so all these are factors that can lead to a model to fail. The biggest thing is the aspirations of the people. So that's why you have to be very careful. You are really walking this tightrope. When we also talk about ecotourism, you cannot have mass ecotourism the way you have in, say, the Sakal or Pangot area of Uttarakhand or any other area. This will completely cause this entire effort to fail, because you have to consider the aspirations of the people. Yes, they need some technical support. They do need some financial support, but you have to be very, very careful with uh, what you're initiating or what you're proposing. That's why we, in all these years, we've never promoted mass tourism. We've never, encouraged the local there to, invite more people, more than the capacity. Of course, we don't know what the capacity is there, but we know that mass tourism will be bad for this area. So when you are exposing these areas to conservation and conservation tools, you have to be very careful about, like keeping all these evils away as well.
Siddharth, I have a question
I
for you.
hope,
Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question for you on the similar lines actually. So I just finished shooting my second film, which is exactly on this question.
Yeah.
which is understanding the sustainability of ecotourism or wildlife tourism in India. Especially, my story revolves around Central India with COVID as
Yeah.
background. Uh, what I would like to ask you is the sustainability of such projects, because not just Nagaland, you and me and other people on the forum today as well have seen a lot of massive gala launches of projects, and
Yeah.
nobody talks about these projects later, about the sustainability. Are they functional? Are they not? So how difficult is it for such projects to be sustainable, and how can that be achieved?
It's very, very difficult, Sushil. I mean, I'll be very honest with you. Like even the ecotourism thing that we planned in whatever small scale, it's failed after a certain point. And why it failed is because there are no roads in Nagaland. So only someone like you or someone who wants to do off-roading will go to this kind of a place. Yes, I mean the homestays are very pretty. They're clean. Yes, the biodiversity exists, but just reaching that area itself is a challenge. I mean, it just takes 7 hours from Kohima to reach this particular spot. I'm sure Yaranjit will agree with that, and that is because there are no roads. It's only 100, kilometers from the state capital, but because there are no roads, it takes a lot of time to reach this particular area. And that's why, I mean, these are major concerns for ecotourists or for general tourists as well. Uh, so the sustainability part of the ecotourism thing has definitely failed for us. We've realized that we have to think about something else in the long run, uh, some other alternative livelihood option that is more feasible. But it was worth trying. It was worth trying to see, how the communities react to these ecotourists and how the ecotourists react to uh, the the area. And what we achieved was that, at least because of these ecotourists, we had this opportunity to document more biodiversity. There were some butterfly experts, there were some bird experts. You came there. A lot of new things got explored in that, discovered during that time.
My supporting question to this would be: is there a way in which these projects can be audited, not on the point of view of monetary prospect, but the success rate of these projects? Because I see these projects happening all the time across India, and a lot of credit being given to them, and a lot of funding being spent on such projects without actually considering the plan after it is launched. Because once
Yeah.
it is launched, then people celebrate it for some time, then we never hear about most of these projects. So is there a system
Yeah.
these projects can be audited on the terms of their performance?
Yeah, I'm sure there must be. I mean, there are big funding agencies like UNDP and GIZ who have like these massive projects. I was just mentioning the Secure Himalaya project. And they have these certain monitoring, they have this monitoring framework where they say that, for example, uh, okay, if you talk about livelihood, then say 20% people had access to X thing, then now 40% after the project intervention have access to the X thing. But it's just all on the paper. There should be some serious evaluation of these projects. But if I have to talk about this project again, I would say that a lot of time has actually gone. A lot of our time and effort has actually gone on creating these green heroes. We've invested a lot in these green heroes because we knew that the moment the project is over, the moment the funding dries, then this is what is going to happen. The fate that you're talking about. So that's why this project is still successful is because we've invested so much in these green heroes, and now they locally continue to motivate and continue all the work that we just initiated. But yeah, I mean, you're right. This sort of evaluation should be there, but it does not happen in our country.
Okay, I think we have the last question for you for the day. Is there any specific set of rules and regulations to declare an area into a CCA? This is about the Divanshu Pawar.
No, not exactly. I mean, what generally happens is rules and regulations are simple that you declare a particular patch of forest, good forest as a CCA, and then you put a complete ban on hunting, on logging, on collecting anything from that area. You just basically leave it untouched. And that's why, I mean, many such CCAs exist in Nagaland traditionally. The reasons could vary. It could be that some CCA is a source of water for that particular village. It could be that some CCA could be a breeding ground for that for their wildlife. So the reasons are plenty. But the simple rules and regulations that one follows, that we have also seen, is that you just leave that area untouched. Nobody's allowed to go there. Nobody's allowed to hunt and collect anything from that area. That rule itself is simple. And then, of course, you have to monitor. You have to patrol that area as well, which many villages are doing on their own. Thank you.
I think, Devanshu, that answers your question. I would like to thank Siddharth again for doing this wonderful session for us. And I would like to thank all the audience who joined us today. In case you have joined the session midway, do not worry. This session would be converted into a YouTube video and uploaded on our channel, which is Journeys Explorer, by either tonight or tomorrow morning. So in case you missed on to this session, you can always watch it there and share it with your friends as well. Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Sushil, and thank you all of you for joining in. Thank you.
Right.
Bye.
For our regulars, I would like to suggest next Wednesday, same time would be our next session. The topic would be announced soon. Thank you, guys.